The air inside the Oklahoma State Penitentiary execution chamber smells like antiseptic and something older. Something you can't quite name but can't stop thinking about after you leave. The room is small, smaller than you'd imagine. The walls are painted a kind of institutional green that hasn't changed since the 1970s. There's a gurney in the center, equipped with leather restraints. An IV line runs through a small hole in the wall into a room where executioners stand out of sight. A window on the left side of the room looks into a space where witnesses sit. Journalists, family members of victims, sometimes family members of the condemned, depending on who shows up. The floor is concrete. The lights are fluorescent. It's not dramatic. It's not designed to be. That's almost the worst part. Oklahoma sits at a very specific intersection of American history and American violence. It was the site of one of the deadliest domestic terrorist attacks in history. It has produced serial killers, mass murderers, and criminals whose cases changed the entire national conversation around capital punishment. And it has executed more people per capita than almost any other state in the nation. Since 1915, Oklahoma has executed over 200 people. The methods have shifted: electrocution, hanging, lethal injection, but the outcomes have not. And some of those executions have gone so badly wrong that they sparked federal investigations, international outrage, and a years-long moratorium on executions that lasted nearly half a decade. In this video, we're going to walk through 10 of the most notorious, most disturbing, and most consequential cases in Oklahoma death row history. We're talking about the crimes themselves, the victims, the violence, the investigations. We're talking about what happened inside the courtroom and what happened inside that chamber. And we're talking about some of the most haunting final words ever spoken by a person who knew exactly how many minutes they had left to live. But before we step inside that execution chamber for the very first time, drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you're watching this from. We have viewers from every corner of the globe, and we genuinely want to know who's here with us tonight. Are you in the US, the UK, Australia, somewhere else entirely? Let us know, because no matter where you are, these stories are going to hit you the same way they hit everyone who encounters them for the first time. All right, let's begin. Case number 1, James French. I have a terrific headline for you. Executed, August 10th, 1966. Method, electric chair. James French walked into the execution chamber on August 10th, 1966, and as the guards strapped him into the electric chair, he turned to the journalists sitting in the witness area and said, and this is verbatim, "I have a terrific headline for you. French fries." That was his final statement, a pun, a joke, delivered with complete composure by a man about to be killed by several thousand volts of electricity. French was executed at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, and he holds a distinction no one else in American history shares. He is the only person ever executed in the United States for a murder that was committed while already serving a life sentence for a different murder. That's not a typo. He killed 2 people at 2 completely separate points in his life, and the only reason he could be executed for the second murder is because there was literally nowhere left to go on the punishment scale. But to understand how James French ended up in that chair, we have to go back, way back, to 1958. The first murder, 1958. James French was 20 years old in 1958, living in the kind of poverty and instability that marked a lot of lives in rural post-war America. He was drifting. No stable home, no consistent employment, no direction. In late 1958, French was hitchhiking across the country when he was picked up by a motorist named Frank Boone. The details of what happened next are sparse and disturbing. At some point during the drive, James French murdered Frank Boone. The motive, according to French himself, was robbery, though French later gave inconsistent accounts. Boone was killed and left on the roadside. French was caught, tried, and convicted of first-degree murder. The death penalty was on the table. But here's where it gets complicated. French didn't want to die at that time. His attorneys argued against execution, and eventually he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He went to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, and for a few years, life settled into the brutal but survivable rhythm of maximum security incarceration. The second murder, 1961. It was 1961. French had been inside for roughly 3 years, and somewhere in those 3 years, something in him had shifted. Later, French would tell people that he had made a decision. He didn't want to live the rest of his life in prison. He had tried to get himself executed in 1958 and failed, so he decided to force the issue. His cellmate was a man named Eddie Lee Shelton. French strangled Shelton inside their shared cell at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, killed him with his bare hands, and then he waited. He was charged with first-degree murder again. He told his attorneys not to appeal. He told the court he wanted to die. He actively cooperated with the prosecution and refused to let anyone fight for his life. In essence, James French engineered his own death sentence, using another human being as the mechanism to get there. Shelton, the actual victim in all of this, has often been a footnote in the telling of French's story. He was a young man serving his own sentence, placed in a cell with someone who had already made up his mind. He didn't have a choice about any of it. The trial and death row. French spent 5 years on death row between 1961 and 1966. He continued to refuse all appeals. At various points, groups opposed to capital punishment attempted to intervene on his behalf, arguing that a man who wanted to die couldn't meaningfully consent to the process, that executing someone who was suicidal was morally different from executing a resistant, condemned prisoner. The courts rejected those arguments. French was unbothered. By all accounts, he spent his time on death row in a state of unusual calm. He had made peace with the outcome because it was, in his view, the outcome he had always been trying to reach. The final moments, August 10th, 1966. James French ate his last meal, though the specific details of what he requested have not been well documented. He was walked to the execution chamber at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He was strapped into the electric chair. And then he made his joke. "I have a terrific headline for you. French fries." The current was applied. James French was pronounced dead. He was 33 years old. Oklahoma would not execute another person for nearly 2 decades. Case number 2, Roger Dale Stafford, the murder of an entire family. Executed July 1st, 1995. Method, lethal injection. There are crimes that disturb people, and then there are crimes that break something in the people who hear about them. Something that takes a long time to put back together. Roger Dale Stafford belongs in the second category. Stafford wasn't just a killer. He was a methodical, predatory, cold-hearted man who, over the course of a single summer in 1978, committed 2 separate massacres that left 10 people dead. Not 1, not 2, 10 people, including 3 members of a single family. A father, a mother, and their teenage son. Let's start at the beginning. The Melvin Lorenz family, June 22nd, 1978. It was a Thursday evening in early summer. Harold Melvin, his wife, Verna Melvin, and their teenage son, Richard Melvin, had been traveling through Oklahoma. They were from out of state passing through, and at some point their car broke down on Interstate 40 near Bethel, Oklahoma. Roger Dale Stafford and his wife, Verna Stafford, who was deeply complicit in what followed, came across the stranded family. On the surface, it looked like a Good Samaritan scenario, someone stopping to help. The Melvins accepted assistance, and then Stafford shot all three of them: Harold Melvin, Verna Melvin, Richard Melvin, murdered roadside in the dark in the middle of Oklahoma. The bodies were discovered. The case went cold. Stafford and his wife moved on. The Sirloin Stockade Massacre, July 16, 1978. Less than a month later, Roger Dale Stafford walked into a Sirloin Stockade restaurant in Oklahoma City just before closing time on the evening of July 16, 1978. The Sirloin Stockade was a family steakhouse chain, the kind of place with dim lighting and big platters of food. At closing time, there were 6 employees still inside, finishing up the night's work, cleaning, counting out the till. What Stafford did next was not impulsive. It wasn't rage-fueled. It was calculated, methodical, and horrifying. He forced all 6 employees, David Salzman, age 24, Terry Horst, age 21, David Sanders, age 16, Linda Inman, age 17, Anthony Tu, age 20, and Isaac Freeman, age 14, into the restaurant's walk-in freezer at gunpoint. Isaac Freeman was 14 years old, a teenager working a summer job. Stafford shot all 6 of them execution style. He then took the cash from the register, roughly $1,000. $1,000. That's what 6 human lives were worth to Roger Dale Stafford on that July night. The investigation. Investigators moved fast after the Sirloin Stockade Massacre. The crime scene was devastating. 6 people shot in a freezer, the youngest being a 14-year-old boy. And the pressure to solve it was enormous. The break came through Verna Stafford, Roger's wife. She had been present for the Melvin family murders. She had first-hand knowledge of what her husband had done. And at some point, the weight of it became too much, or the calculation shifted, and she began talking to investigators. Verna Stafford's testimony was the key that unlocked both cases. She implicated Roger directly in the Melvin murders and provided information that tied him to the Sirloin Stockade Massacre. Roger Stafford was arrested and charged. He was tried separately for each set of murders. The trial and death row. Stafford was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder for the Melvin family killings and 6 counts of first-degree murder for the Sirloin Stockade Massacre. He was sentenced to death multiple times over. He sat on death row for 17 years. In those 17 years, Stafford appealed multiple times. He tried various legal strategies, challenging the admissibility of evidence, questioning the reliability of his wife's testimony, arguing constitutional violations in the sentencing phase. None of it worked. Verna Stafford, for her part, was also convicted of murder. She was not sentenced to death. She spent years in prison. Roger Dale Stafford became one of the longest-serving inmates on Oklahoma's death row. He maintained, at different points, both partial admissions and outright denials of various aspects of the crimes. The final moments. July 1st, 1995. Roger Dale Stafford ate his last meal: 1 T-bone steak, French fries, onion rings, and a Pepsi. Classic American food. The kind of thing you'd find on the menu of a steakhouse restaurant, which, given the nature of his crimes,
reads as either oblivious or deliberately provocative, depending on how charitable you're feeling. His final statement was brief. He said he was sorry for the suffering he had caused. He asked for forgiveness. He did not provide new information about the crimes, and he did not specifically address the families of his victims by name. Lethal injection was administered at 9:12 p.m. on July 1st, 1995. Roger Dale Stafford was pronounced dead at 9:22 p.m. He was 51 years old.
10 people dead, $1,000 stolen, 17 years on death row. Case number 3, Wanda Jean Allen, Oklahoma's first female execution in 81 years. Executed January 11, 2001. Method, lethal injection. Oklahoma hadn't executed a woman in 81 years when Wanda Jean Allen was strapped to the gurney in the McAllister execution chamber in January 2001. Her case is complicated. It is not a story of innocence, but it is a story that raises serious and uncomfortable questions about intellectual disability, about the criminal justice system's capacity to evaluate mental function, about race, about gender, and about what it means to impose the ultimate punishment on a person whose cognitive abilities may have been fundamentally compromised. None of that erases the victim. None of it is meant to. Gloria Leathers was a real woman who died a real and violent death. She deserves to be at the center of this story. The relationship. Wanda Jean Allen and Gloria Leathers were romantic partners. They had an intense, volatile, and ultimately lethal relationship in Oklahoma City in the late 1980s. Allen had a prior conviction that's important to understand. In 1981, she had shot and killed her best friend, Deidre Pettis, during what she described as an argument. She claimed self-defense. She was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 4 years in prison. She served her time and was released. So when Wanda Jean Allen and Gloria Leathers began having serious, escalating problems in their relationship, Allen was not an unknown quantity to the criminal justice system. She had already killed someone once before. December 1st, 1988, Oklahoma City. The night of December 1st, 1988 was cold. Allen and Leathers had been fighting. The arguments between them had been getting worse. Neighbors had heard raised voices. There had been a prior domestic disturbance report at the police station itself, which is one of the most haunting details in this case. According to witness accounts and investigative records, Leathers and Allen had actually gone to the police station to resolve a dispute. They were told to work it out. They left. Hours later, in the parking lot of the police station, of all places, Wanda Jean Allen shot Gloria Leathers once in the abdomen with a handgun. Leathers was rushed to a hospital. She clung to life for 10 days. On December 11, 1988, Gloria Leathers died from her wounds. She was 29 years old. The investigation and trial. Allen was arrested relatively quickly. The circumstances of the shooting, happening outside a police station in front of witnesses, made the evidentiary path straightforward. What complicated the case was what happened in the courtroom. Wanda Jean Allen had a documented IQ that her defense attorneys argued placed her in the range of intellectual disability. A neuropsychologist testified on her behalf that Allen had suffered brain damage, possibly from a car accident in her youth, that compromised her impulse control and cognitive functioning. The prosecution argued that Allen was not disabled, that she was a functioning adult who had made a choice to kill, twice. The jury agreed with the prosecution. Allen was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The appeals. The years between Allen's conviction in 1989 and her execution in 2001 were marked by repeated appeals that raised her intellectual disability as a central issue. Her attorneys argued that executing a person with significantly diminished intellectual capacity was cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment. The courts at multiple levels rejected those arguments. It's worth noting that in 2002, the year after Allen's execution, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Atkins versus Virginia that executing intellectually disabled individuals was unconstitutional. Had that ruling come a year earlier, Wanda Jean Allen's fate might have been different. That timing matters. It should be acknowledged. The final moments, January 11th, 2001. Wanda Jean Allen's last meal was fried chicken, peach cobbler, and a Pepsi. She spent her final hours with her spiritual advisor. Her final statement included a prayer. She spoke about her love for God. She spoke to her family. She acknowledged the pain caused to Gloria Leather's family. The full statement ran for several minutes and was delivered clearly and calmly. Lethal injection was administered. Wanda Jean Allen was pronounced dead at 9:17 p.m. on January 11th, 2001. She was 41 years old. Oklahoma had executed its first woman in over 8 decades. Before we go further, if you think it's important to document these dark histories and make sure the victims in these cases are remembered, hit the subscribe button right now. These stories deserve to be told carefully and completely, and that's exactly what we're here to do. Because the cases we haven't gotten to yet, some of them changed the entire national conversation around capital punishment, and we're just getting started. Case number 4, Thomas Graasso. I did not get my SpaghettiOs. Executed, March 20th, 1995. Method, lethal injection. Some cases lodge in the public memory not because of the scale of the crime, but because of one single bizarre detail that refuses to go away. Thomas Graasso is one of those cases. His crimes were brutal. His victims were elderly and vulnerable. His behavior throughout the legal process was arrogant and strange. But what most people remember about Thomas Graasso, what gets quoted in true crime discussions and criminal justice debates, and even in the national news, is what he said in his final statement about his last meal. We'll get there. First, let's talk about who Thomas Graasso was and what he did. The crimes: New York, 1990, and Oklahoma, 1990. Thomas Graasso operated across state lines, and that interstate dimension made his case legally complicated in ways that became genuinely unprecedented. His first victim was an 87-year-old woman named Hilda Johnson, who lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Graasso broke into her home on Christmas Eve, 1990, and strangled her with the cord from her Christmas tree lights. He then stole her Social Security check. He left Oklahoma and went to New York, where he killed a 68-year-old man named Leslie Holtz in Staten Island. The method was similar: strangulation. Again, the motive was robbery. Graasso was caught in New York. He was tried there first and convicted of Holtz's murder. New York sentenced him to 15 years to life in prison. And here's where the story takes a genuinely strange turn. The extradition fight. Oklahoma wanted Thomas Graasso too. Oklahoma had Hilda Johnson's murder to prosecute, and Oklahoma had the death penalty. New York, at that point in time, did not. Oklahoma formally requested extradition. Graasso, facing a maximum of life imprisonment in New York, fought to stay in New York. He didn't want to go to Oklahoma. He knew exactly what awaited him there. The fight over extradition became a genuine interstate legal battle. Oklahoma Governor David Walters had made a campaign promise to bring Graasso back to face Oklahoma justice. His successor, Frank Keating, maintained that commitment and ultimately succeeded in having Graasso extradited. Graasso was transferred to Oklahoma, tried for the murder of Hilda Johnson, convicted and sentenced to death. He fought it. He appealed. He was unsuccessful. He was also, throughout this entire process, remarkably forthright about his disdain for everyone and everything involved. The final moments, March 20th, 1995. Thomas Graasso's last meal request is the most famous detail of his entire case. He asked for 1 steamed clam, 1 steamed mussel, Burger King onion rings, a pumpkin pie, diced strawberries, and, here's the key one, a can of SpaghettiOs. He got most of it. He did not get the SpaghettiOs. The kitchen apparently substituted spaghetti with tomato sauce. This was not acceptable to Thomas Graasso. His final statement, delivered just before his execution on March 20th, 1995, included the following line, spoken with apparent complete sincerity. "I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." He was executed by lethal injection, pronounced dead at 10:16 p.m. He was 32 years old. Hilda Johnson was 87. She was strangled with her own Christmas tree lights on Christmas Eve, while the man who killed her stole her Social Security check. Thomas Graasso's last concern, expressed to the world, was pasta shape. Case number 5. Michael Lee Wilson. I feel my whole body burning. Executed January 9th, 2014. Method: lethal injection. By 2014, Oklahoma was already operating in the middle of a national firestorm over lethal injection. The pharmaceutical companies that had traditionally supplied the drugs used in executions had begun restricting their use for capital punishment. States were being forced to find new drug combinations, new suppliers, new protocols. Oklahoma was among the states that began experimenting with alternative drug formulations. Michael Lee Wilson's execution became one of the first data points in a debate that would explode, catastrophically, just months later. The crime, February 19, 1995. Michael Lee Wilson was a teenager when he committed the murder that would eventually cost him his life. On February 19, 1995, Wilson and 3 accomplices, John Alverson, Gerald Dow, and Stephen Harbour, were present for the robbery and murder of a gas station clerk named Richard Yost in Lawton, Oklahoma. Yost was a 54-year-old man working his shift at a Phillips 66 station. The men beat Richard Yost to death with a metal pipe. They beat him until he was dead, and they took money from the register. All 4 men were charged in connection with the murder. Wilson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He spent nearly 20 years on death row. The execution, January 9, 2014. Wilson was 45 years old on the night of his execution. His last meal included chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, and Mountain Dew. Oklahoma, at this point, was using a 3-drug protocol: midazolam as a sedative, followed by vecuronium bromide to stop respiration, followed by potassium chloride to stop the heart. The midazolam, the sedative, was the drug that was becoming increasingly controversial. Critics argued it did not reliably render a person unconscious or unable to feel pain before the subsequent drugs were administered. Michael Lee Wilson was strapped to the gurney. The lethal injection process began, and then Wilson spoke. While the drugs were being administered, after the midazolam had been given, at a point when he was supposed to be unconscious, Wilson said, in a voice loud enough for witnesses in the chamber to hear, "I feel my whole body burning." The execution continued. He was pronounced dead shortly after. That statement, "I feel my whole body burning," became one of the most widely quoted and deeply unsettling pieces of evidence in the growing national debate about lethal injection protocols. It suggested, to critics of Oklahoma's method, that the midazolam was not working as intended, that inmates might be experiencing the final stages of execution, the burning sensation of potassium chloride entering the bloodstream, while conscious and unable to communicate their distress. Oklahoma did not immediately change its protocol. 3 months later, it would be impossible to ignore. Case number 6, Clayton Lockett, the execution that shocked the world. Executed April 29, 2014. Method: lethal injection, botched. This is the one. If you've heard anything about Oklahoma's death row, if you've seen any news coverage of controversial executions in the United States, you have almost certainly heard about what happened to Clayton Lockett on April 29, 2014. What occurred in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary's execution chamber that night was witnessed by journalists. It was documented. It was reported around the world. It triggered a federal investigation, a moratorium on executions, and a Supreme Court case that went to oral arguments. But before we talk about what happened in that chamber, we have to talk about who Clayton Lockett was and what he did. Because his victim, 19-year-old Stephanie Neiman, is too often swallowed up by the controversy over his death. The crime, June 3, 1999. It was a warm, early summer night in Perry, Oklahoma. Stephanie Neiman was 19 years old, a recent high school graduate who had just delivered some boxes to a friend's house. By all accounts, she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Clayton Lockett, along with 2 accomplices, showed up at the same residence with the intent to commit robbery. When Stephanie Neiman and her friend Bobby Borjas arrived with the boxes, they walked straight into the robbery in progress. What followed was horrifying. Lockett and his associates tied both young women up with duct tape. They beat them. During the assault, Stephanie Neiman was defiant. She refused to promise that she wouldn't go to the police. That defiance, according to testimony, is what made Lockett decide she had to die. He ordered one of his accomplices to dig a shallow grave out in a rural field. They drove Stephanie Neiman to that location, still alive, still bound, and she was shot twice with a sawed-off shotgun. Witnesses at trial testified that after she was shot, she was still alive, still moving, still breathing. She was buried alive in that shallow grave. She suffocated to death in the Oklahoma dirt. She was 19 years old. She had just graduated high school. Her life had barely started. The trial and death row. Clayton Lockett was convicted of first-degree murder along with numerous other charges, including rape, kidnapping, and assault. He was sentenced to death. He spent 15 years on death row. During those 15 years, Lockett's case moved through the appeals process repeatedly. Nothing succeeded in overturning his sentence. The execution, April 29, 2014. Oklahoma had scheduled 2 executions for the same night, Clayton Lockett at 6 p.m. and Charles Warner approximately 90 minutes later. It was an unusual scheduling choice that would later come under scrutiny. At 6:23 p.m., the lethal injection process began. The same 3-drug protocol that had been used on Michael Lee Wilson 3 months earlier: midazolam, vecuronium bromide, potassium chloride. The IV line was placed in Lockett's groin after attempts to find a suitable vein elsewhere in his body were unsuccessful. This detail matters because the placement of the IV and whether it was properly inserted into the vein or had blown through the vein wall would be central to understanding what happened next. At 6:33 p.m., Clayton Lockett was declared unconscious. At 6:36 p.m., the second and third drugs began to be administered. And then Lockett started moving. He lifted his head. He writhed on the gurney. He attempted to speak. Witnesses described him as grimacing, as struggling. The blinds in the witness room were lowered at 6:39 p.m., cutting off the view of what was happening on the gurney. The execution was officially halted. But there was no reversal drug. You can't un-execute someone. You can stop administering the drugs, but you cannot undo what has already been given. At 7:06 p.m., 43 minutes after the process began, Clayton Lockett was pronounced dead. The official cause was a massive heart attack. Investigators later determined that the IV line had not been properly seated in a vein. The midazolam had been administered into tissue rather than into the bloodstream, meaning Lockett had not been adequately sedated when the subsequent drugs were administered. He had been conscious, or near conscious, while vecuronium bromide paralyzed his respiratory muscles and potassium chloride burned through his body. The reaction from the international community was immediate and furious. The United Nations, the European Union, human rights organizations worldwide all condemned what had happened. Medical professionals wrote op-eds and gave interviews about what the botched execution indicated about the midazolam protocol. The second scheduled execution that night, Charles Warner, was postponed. A federal investigation was launched. Oklahoma placed a moratorium on executions. Case number 7. Charles Frederick Warner, the aftermath. Executed January 15, 2015. Method: lethal injection. Charles Warner should have been executed on the same night as Clayton Lockett. He was on the gurney, in the chamber, ready to go, when the decision was made to halt proceedings following what happened with Lockett. Warner was taken back to his cell. He was given 9 more months of life that he otherwise would not have had. And then, on January 15, 2015, Charles Frederick Warner was executed, the first person put to death in Oklahoma after the moratorium that followed the Lockett disaster. The crime. Charles Warner had been convicted of the murder of an 11-month-old baby girl named Adriana Waller. He had been the live-in boyfriend of Adriana's mother. In 1997, Adriana was brought to the hospital with injuries consistent with severe physical abuse. She died. Warner was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The details of what was done to an 11-month-old infant are beyond the scope of what we need to lay out here, except to say that Warner's crime was one of the most clear-cut cases on Oklahoma's death row in terms of the brutality inflicted and the vulnerability of the victim. The legal fight. Warner's case became central to a Supreme Court challenge, Glossip versus Graasso, which specifically challenged whether Oklahoma's use of midazolam in its lethal injection protocol constituted cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment. Warner himself filed as a plaintiff in that case. He argued that given what happened to Clayton Lockett, the same protocol used on him would constitute torture. The Supreme Court took the case. But Warner's execution was not stayed pending the court's decision. His appeals ran out. His execution was scheduled and upheld. He went into that chamber knowing that the Supreme Court was actively debating whether the method used to kill him was constitutional. The court had not yet ruled. The case was still open. He was executed anyway. The final moments. January 15, 2015. Warner ate his last meal. A cheeseburger, French fries, onion rings, and a Pepsi. His final words were unexpected. He said, "I am not a monster." And then, after a pause, "Well, the drugs are supposed to be flowing. My body is on fire." Same language as Michael Lee Wilson. Same reported sensation. Fire. Burning. Warner was pronounced dead at 6:26 p.m.
The Supreme Court would rule in Glossip versus Graasso 5 months later, in a 5-4 decision, upholding the use of midazolam as not constituting cruel and unusual punishment. Justice Sonia Sotomayor wrote a blistering dissent, comparing the 3-drug protocol to being buried alive. The debate did not end with that ruling. It simply continued. Oklahoma's execution chamber has drawn the eyes of the entire world, and we are not done yet. The cases ahead of us include a man who may have been innocent, a woman who broke barriers, and one of the most controversial ongoing cases in American criminal justice history. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming deep dives, because what's coming next changed everything.
Case number 8. John Marian Grant, the vomiting execution. Executed October 28, 2021. Method: lethal injection. Oklahoma came off its moratorium, its pause on executions, and resumed killing in October 2021. After years of legal battles, new drug protocols, and systemic reviews of what had gone wrong in 2014, the state was ready to restart. John Marian Grant was the first person executed after the moratorium ended. It did not go smoothly. The crime. John Marian Grant was a career criminal with a long history of violent offenses. In 1998, he murdered a prison cafeteria worker named Gay Carter at the Dick Connor Correctional Center in Hominy, Oklahoma. Carter, who was 43 years old, was a civilian employee of the prison, a food service worker doing her job in the cafeteria. Grant stabbed her 11 times with a prison-made shank. He stabbed her repeatedly in front of witnesses in the middle of the prison cafeteria. Gay Carter died from her wounds. She was killed doing her job in a place where she was supposed to be protected by the security apparatus of the state. The trial and death row. Grant was already serving time for robbery when he murdered Gay Carter. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He spent over 2 decades on death row. His appeals raised, among other issues, the now familiar questions about Oklahoma's lethal injection protocol, specifically the use of midazolam. His attorneys argued, given the documented problems with previous executions, that the protocol posed a substantial risk of serious harm. The courts disagreed. His execution was scheduled for October 28, 2021. The execution, October 28, 2021. John Marian Grant was strapped to the gurney in the execution chamber. The process began. Midazolam was administered, and then Grant began vomiting. He vomited multiple times on the gurney. He also began convulsing. His body shook. He was not still, not quiet, not unconscious in any visible sense of the word. Witnesses, including journalists who had been admitted to the chamber, described what they saw in detail. One reporter said Grant had convulsed more than 12 times. Prison officials said Grant was unconscious during these events. Outside observers and the reporters in the room were less certain. The execution continued. John Marian Grant was pronounced dead at 4:21 p.m. Gay Carter's family had waited 23 years for justice. What they witnessed when they finally got it was another Oklahoma execution that raised more questions than it answered. The state pressed forward. More executions were scheduled. The debate continued at a volume that showed no signs of diminishing. Case number 9. Julius Darius Jones, the ongoing controversy. Scheduled for execution, November 18, 2021. Status: sentence commuted. This is the one that hasn't ended. Julius Darius Jones has been on Oklahoma's death row since 2002. He was 27 years old at the time of his sentencing. By 2021, he had spent almost 2 decades in a cell in McAllister. And unlike many of the people in this video, Julius Jones has maintained his innocence from the very first day. He has maintained it consistently, through 2 decades of appeals, through a wave of public attention that brought his case to national and international prominence, through celebrities and athletes and politicians calling for his release. And he was still maintaining his innocence when a prison gurney was prepared for him in November 2021. This case is different. Not because the crime wasn't real. Paul Howell was a real man who was murdered. His family's grief is real and has lasted decades. But the question of whether Julius Jones was the person who pulled the trigger has never been settled to the satisfaction of a large segment of legal observers, criminal justice advocates, and the general public. The crime, July 28, 1999. Paul Howell was 45 years old. He was a father, a husband, a businessman from Edmond, Oklahoma. On the night of July 28, 1999, Howell was shot and killed in his driveway as he returned home. His wife and 2 young daughters were present. He was shot in the head at close range while wearing a distinctive red Chicago Bulls jersey. The killer fled. The weapon disappeared. The investigation and arrest. The investigation focused on Julius Jones, who was 19 years old at the time. Jones was black. Howell was white. The case drew significant attention to questions of racial dynamics in Oklahoma's criminal justice system. The prosecution's case rested heavily on the testimony of Jones's co-defendant, Christopher Jordan, who ultimately pleaded guilty and received a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against Jones. Jordan claimed that Jones had committed the murder. A red Chicago Bulls jersey, matching the one worn by the killer, was found in Jones's family home. Jones maintained that it had been planted there by Jordan, and that he had been framed by the actual killer who was cooperating with the prosecution to escape the death penalty himself. Defense attorneys pointed to what they described as inconsistencies in Jordan's account, problems with the forensic evidence, and testimony from Jones's family members who said he was home when the murder occurred. They also raised serious concerns about the conduct of the jurors who convicted Jones, including one juror who, according to post-conviction statements from other jurors, had allegedly used racial slurs during deliberations. The advocacy campaign. Over the years, Julius Jones's case became one of the most high-profile innocence advocacy campaigns in American history. The documentary series, The Last Defense, produced by actress Viola Davis, brought his case to a national audience in 2018. Hundreds of thousands of people signed petitions. Oklahoma legislators held hearings. Kim Kardashian, LeBron James, and dozens of other public figures called for clemency. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board voted in September 2021 to recommend commutation of Jones's sentence from death to life without parole. Not exoneration, not release, but commutation, reducing the sentence. November 18, 2021. Julius Jones was scheduled to be executed on November 18, 2021. The gurney was prepared. Jones was moved to the pre-execution holding area. His family said their goodbyes. With 4 hours left before his execution, Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt granted commutation, commuting Jones's sentence to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Julius Jones was not executed. He is alive, incarcerated, and as of the recording of this video, he remains behind bars in Oklahoma. He has never stopped proclaiming his innocence. Paul Howell's family has consistently and firmly believed in Jones's guilt and felt that justice demanded execution. His daughters, who were present when their father was murdered and have grown up carrying that trauma, have spoken publicly about the pain of watching their father's killer receive continued advocacy and public sympathy. This case has no clean ending. It may never have one. Case number 10. Richard Glossip, the man who has almost been executed multiple times. Status: on death row, execution dates set and stayed multiple times. Richard Glossip has come closer to being executed more times than almost any other person currently on death row in America. He has eaten last meals. He has made peace with dying. He has been strapped to the gurney and had the execution stayed at the last minute, multiple times. And as of this recording, he is still alive. And his case has, in the past year, taken a turn that even his most committed skeptics are finding difficult to dismiss. The crime, January 7th, 1997. Barry Van Treese was the owner of an Oklahoma City motel called the Best Budget Inn. On January 7th, 1997, Van Treese was beaten to death in one of the rooms at his own motel. He was beaten with a baseball bat so severely that he died from his injuries. He was 54 years old. The man who beat Barry Van Treese with that baseball bat was Justin Sneed, a handyman employed at the motel. Sneed confessed to the killing. Sneed was the one holding the bat. Sneed was the one who delivered the blows. Justin Sneed did not receive the death penalty. Justin Sneed is in prison, serving life without parole. Richard Glossip, the motel manager, Sneed's boss, was convicted of being the mastermind behind the killing. The prosecution's theory was that Glossip had offered Sneed money to kill Van Treese, motivated by Glossip's belief that Van Treese was about to discover that Glossip had been embezzling from the motel. Glossip had no physical evidence against him. There was no DNA, no weapon, no witnesses to any agreement between him and Sneed. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on the testimony of Justin Sneed, the actual killer, who received his plea deal in exchange for testifying that Glossip had put him up to it. Glossip has maintained his innocence since 1997. The near executions. Glossip was first scheduled for execution in 2015. The Supreme Court case Glossip versus Graasso, the case challenging Oklahoma's midazolam protocol, carries his name specifically because he was one of the plaintiffs challenging the drug being used to kill him. He was scheduled to be executed multiple times in 2015 alone. On one occasion, his execution was stayed because the state discovered it had received potassium acetate instead of potassium chloride, the wrong drug. That discovery, made minutes before the scheduled execution, led to another stay. He was scheduled again and again. Each time, new legal filings, new evidence, new stays. The 2023 to 2025 developments. What happened in Glossip's case in the years after 2023 is where things get genuinely significant. The Oklahoma Attorney General's office, which had been prosecuting and defending Glossip's conviction for decades, conducted a review of the case and came to a conclusion that stunned legal observers. The AG's office determined that Justin Sneed had lied, that prosecutors had withheld evidence, that Sneed had been diagnosed with a psychiatric condition and had been receiving psychiatric medication at the time of his testimony, a fact that was never disclosed to the defense, as it should have been under Brady disclosure requirements. The Oklahoma Attorney General's office, not Glossip's defense team, but the prosecution side, filed a brief acknowledging serious problems with the conviction. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals has been reviewing the case. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board voted to recommend clemency. The case is ongoing. Richard Glossip is still on death row. He is still alive. And the question of what actually happened at the Best Budget Inn in January of 1997 remains, in the eyes of a growing number of people, including the state's own prosecutors, genuinely and deeply unresolved. Barry Van Treese is still dead. His family still believes Glossip was responsible. The pain on that side is real and has lasted nearly 3 decades. But the legal and evidentiary questions that have accumulated around this case, the withheld evidence, the unreliable witness, the absence of physical evidence, have made Glossip versus Oklahoma one of the most watched and most contested capital cases in the country. Whatever happens next, this case is not over. 10 cases, 10 different stories of violence and grief and legal process and, in some instances, profound doubt about whether the machinery of justice was functioning the way it was supposed to. Let's take stock of what we've covered. James French, a man who engineered his own death sentence, making a dark joke as his final act. Roger Dale Stafford, a man who killed 10 people, including a 14-year-old boy working a summer job, for $1,000. Wanda Jean Allen, whose execution came just 1 year before a Supreme Court ruling that might have saved her life, and whose intellectual capacity was never adequately assessed by the system that killed her. Thomas Graasso, who strangled an elderly woman on Christmas Eve and whose final concern was the shape of his pasta. Michael Lee Wilson and Charles Warner, whose reported final sensations of burning raised questions that the justice system was not ready or willing to fully answer. Clayton Lockett, whose botched execution went on for 43 minutes and became one of the most condemned events in the history of American capital punishment, while his victim, Stephanie Neiman, 19 years old, buried alive in an Oklahoma field, deserved far more than to be a footnote in a story about drug protocols. John Marian Grant, who vomited and convulsed on the gurney in 2021 as Oklahoma tried to demonstrate that its process had been cleaned up. Julius Jones, still alive, still proclaiming his innocence, still incarcerated. And Richard Glossip, who has eaten last meals, made peace with dying, and had the needle set aside at the last minute more times than almost anyone else in American history, while the state's own prosecutors begin to acknowledge that something may have gone terribly wrong in his case from the very beginning. Oklahoma is not unique in having a death row, but it is unique in the concentration of controversy, the frequency of execution, and the specific ways in which its system has been forced, sometimes by its own catastrophic failures, to confront the limits and the costs of state-sanctioned killing. None of this is simple. The families of victims in every one of these cases, the Melvins, the Sirloin Stockade families, Gloria Leathers, Hilda Johnson, Stephanie Neiman, Gay Carter, Paul Howell, Barry Van Treese, the children of Richard Yost, all of them carried and continue to carry the weight of what was done to their loved ones. Their grief is not diminished by controversy over execution methods. Their loss is not made smaller by questions about procedural fairness. Those two things, the reality of the victims and the questions about the system, exist together. They have to. That's the hardest part of looking at death row honestly. Which of these 10 cases hit you hardest? Which one made you question something you thought you already understood about justice, about punishment, about what the state should and shouldn't be empowered to do? Was it Clayton Lockett? Was it Julius Jones? Was it Wanda Jean Allen, executed a year before the Supreme Court might have protected her? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and this is exactly the kind of conversation we want to be having. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. We go deep on the cases that don't let go, the ones that keep raising questions long after the verdicts come in. And I will see you in the next video.